Australia. And that went right up until the 1930s, and in some places right up until the 1950s and 60s. Henry Reynolds has just released a book last year which is called The Forgotten War. And the book is basically about the killing of over 300,000 Aboriginal people throughout Australia. It's called it The Forgotten War because people want to forget about it. Reynolds, of course, amongst others, has argued that the history of the massacre of Aboriginal men, women and children needs to be remembered. The Australian history of non-Indigenous and Indigenous engagement is a sad and often ignored one. There has been too many incidents of massacre, murder, torture, the kidnapping and rape of Indigenous women and girls, intimidation and bullying. If you add to that also the forced removal of children, alongside the high incarceration rate of Aboriginal men in particular, but also Aboriginal women, the high death rate of Aboriginal young people, the general sense of hopelessness that is felt by many Indigenous people within Australia, then the engagement between non-Indigenous and Indigenous people of Australia has been a very negative one. It's too sad a story to be whitewashed, isn't it? And it's too much of a truthful story to be retold in another way. We really can't tell the true and honest story of Australian history if we leave out all the nasty bits. The Church's response, as I said, has often been one of collusion or evasiveness. But we also should note there's been some remarkable exceptions along the way. It hasn't been all bad. There have been people like Ernest Whipple, and there have been other missionaries and other people who have spoken up for Aboriginal people, often against great opposition. And quite often, as in the experience of Gribble, they've been punished for standing up against what Shanks would describe bullying power. So my argument really is that true reconciliation begins with honesty. Being honest about the history of our nation. So I guess to the question, whose reconciliation? Who are the reconcilers, or who should be the reconcilers in the act of reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians? Well, quite often in the past, the week of reconciliation has often been an Indigenous thing, but it's not necessarily been seen as a non-Indigenous thing. There's been lots of great celebrations, and rightfully so, of Indigenous culture and Indigenous people, Australian Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islanders, recognising their culture and rejoicing in it and celebrating. But true reconciliation, I think, is a responsibility not just of Indigenous people, but probably the responsibility lies more so with non-Indigenous people. That non-Indigenous people, as they own their own history, for good or for real, and then seek to reconcile with those who have been badly affected and sadly damaged by the history of the Australian nation. So let me make a couple of suggestions, some thought-provoking things perhaps, for how we might do that. Firstly, I think, is to encourage the recognition of Indigenous people within the Constitution of Australia. And there's been a great movement, of course, for doing that. And I think it's important that we get that right, that we place Indigenous people within the Constitution, and that the Constitution recognises that the Indigenous people were here first. But also to recognise too that there was great damage done to them. So I would be strongly encouraging you to strongly encourage others to, certainly when the time comes, vote for recognition. Secondly, I think we should do whatever we can to prevent the proposed changes to the Racial Discrimination Act. I don't think you want to live in Australia where bigotry is a right. We've lived it. We've lived in that nation for too long. Indigenous people have had to put up with bigotry for too long. I don't think we need bigotry enshrined within our laws. We don't want Australia where government and people collude in bullying power. Last year, of course, there was the issue where a young girl played football called Adam Goods an ape. And then Adam Goods rightly stood up for it and highlighted the fact that this was not acceptable. Of course, 13-year-old girls and 13-year-old children say silly things, don't they? But they hear it somewhere. I don't believe she made that up. She obviously heard others saying it. And I think the problem with allowing bigotry is it comes down to another level. And so people see a justification for their own bigotry if they believe that there is a law that protects others. So I'd strongly encourage us, all of us, to do whatever we can. Contact our local members of parliament, local members of the federal parliament, and say we do not want those changes. Thirdly, I think we need to confront our own racism. We need to be honest about the times when perhaps we may have been racist in our own actions. When I go to Sydney twice a year to have an executive meeting with the NATSIAC group, I fly there and catch a train, and then invariably we all catch the train back to the airport together. It's very interesting to sit on a train with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Not only because you have wonderful conversations and so forth, but it's interesting to see the reactions of others. And if there's a seat available next to an Aboriginal person, 9 times out of 10, nobody will sit there. And the last time I went to Sydney and came back, there was a group of us there. We sat down. Somebody got up and moved away. Of course, I didn't have the opportunity to ask them, why did you move? I can only assume that she didn't want to sit with a group of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And that sort of thing is the experience of Indigenous Australians day by day. It's not so much my experience, because most people can't see, and they wouldn't expect it. But when I sit with my friends who appear more Indigenous than I do, I can see it, how people respond. So racism is very much alive within our nation. So there's those little things that we need to be aware of. Going back to the text that I began with, Matthew 5, Jesus encourages his listeners to consider those to whom they may have committed some wrong, to do their best to make amends for it. If they remember anything. And I think one of the most important things we can do in terms of reconciliation is to make sure we and our nation do not forget. There has been some suggestion too about moving away from the black armband view of history. I haven't heard too much of that spoken about just recently. The budget, I think, has sort of dominated a whole lot of political thought at the moment. But there was a suggestion that history was just getting a bit too negative. And we wanted people to be proud of our nation. We wanted people to be proud of their forebears. And I'm all for that. But I think we can't be dishonest in the telling of the story. We have to be honest as we tell the story. And then we can be proud that we've been able to face up to the sins, if you like, of our fathers. And we've been able to do something about it. So whose reconciliation? All of it.